Can you hear me? Yeah. So welcome everyone. I'm present in this room or online. I am very pleased to have been asked to moderate this panel, this beautiful panel, dedicated to discussing the links between peacebuilding and the search for the forcibly disappeared. Thanks to the organizers of this impressive Geneva Peace Week. Firstly, let me introduce myself. I am Marina Eudes, a professor of international law, and also a member of a small organization called the Convention Against Enforced Disappearances Initiative. Our mission is to promote the ratification and implementation of this treaty that was adopted in 2006. And our biggest achievement was the organization of the first World Congress on Enforced Disappearances that took place here in Geneva last January. It brought together more than 600 representatives of civil society organizations from all regions of the world, state delegates, and institutional partners. We heard many contributions on various subjects, including the means and effects of the fight for truth and justice. And it is pertinent to revisit this topic today and to explore it from the perspective of the peacebuilding goal, in the specific context in Syria. An important reminder must be made in this regard. It is estimated that more than 170,000 people have disappeared under the Bashar al-Assad regime. Today, we have 4 panelists whom I warmly thank for accepting to share their precious expertise and testimonies on this subject. Firstly, Professor Olivier Trouville will explain why the search for the disappeared matters for peace. Then we'll hear from the families. Obeda Debag and Asma Al-Faraj will share with us their personal experiences as relatives of the forcibly disappeared persons. Finally, Hugo Sredongologo will speak about the role of the Independent Institution on Missing Persons in the Syrian Arab Republic, the IIMP. This presentation will last around 50 minutes, and then there will be a discussion between the panelists for about 15 minutes. Finally, we will have a short question and answer session with members of the audience, and we'll summarize the key elements of the discussion. I will be conscious about timing, and I thank you in advance for your cooperation on this matter. Last but not least, I would like to inform the audience here and online that one of our panelists will speak in Arabic. So you can access a translation through the Wordy application by using your phones and earphones. And our first speaker is Olivier Trouville, director of the Paris Human Rights Center, the former chairperson of the UN Committee on Enforced Disappearances, and former member of other human rights bodies. We'd like to hear your expertise on enforced disappearances as a global issue and why the role of the search for the disappeared matters for peace. So you have the floor for 10 to 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Marina, and thank you to the organizers of this fantastic Geneva Peace Week. Thank you for inviting us and organizing this panel on enforced disappearances. The event is another important opportunity to meet with some people and institutions who participated actively in the World Congress on Enforced Disappearances that you've just mentioned, Marina. And I'm very much happy that we were able now not only to look backward at what were the achievements since the Congress that took place at the beginning of this year, but also to look forward, most importantly, and what will come next. and what will be and how we will be able to meet with the expectations that were raised by the Congress. We have to have a date in mind, which is the 20th December 2026, because this will be the 20th anniversary of the adoption of the Convention on Enforced Disappearances. So we can start the countdown and start thinking of the actions that we have to take before this date, and also take a rendezvous, have an appointment on that day, so that we can do the stock taking and see what we have done and what needs to be done next. I'm very happy on this occasion that there's already been some commitments, and in particular the Catalan Institute for Peace that has planned to organize a new meeting of women searchers, probably in Barcelona, and I hope by the end of 2026 or beginning of 2027. And this connects very well with our topic for today. This topic is I mean, you know, I was reading the title, and I thought this is not such an easy topic in the end. Why is the search matters for peace, and even more the general title, which is the search for the disappeared as a key contribution to peace building. And I was thinking about this ambassador whom I met some years ago, and I was at that time with the working group on enforced disappearances together with Hugo, who was just sitting next to me, and I was trying to, and I won't name the country, but I was trying to negotiate the possibility of a visit of the working group in the country at that time. And I was absolutely desperate to try to find an opening. This negotiation had been going on for very long. And we were trying to find the right conditions and trying to put this on paper. So we had exchange of letters, etc. And at some point, out of desperation, I proposed to have not an official visit, but more what we call with special procedures a technical visit, through which under which a member of the working group would go and would assess at least the potential for a process of search. And the search was basically meaning excavating mass graves and exhuming remains of the people who had been executed. And the ambassador told me, "Are you serious? Do you really expect me to come back with that proposal to my government?" And I said, you know, this is a good bargain. You know, we're not going to talk about impunity, or we're not going to talk about justice, about prosecuting perpetrators, but more like the humanitarian search. You know, how to maybe exhume and identify the remains, and then return the remains to the families. And he told me, you know, if I'm coming back to my government, it would drive them completely crazy. And you will certainly reignite the conflict in my country. Because the moment we exhume the remains and we start discovering that those people have their hands tied in their back and that they have been tortured and they have been executed, they will be claimed for investigations and for prosecutions. And this will be the beginning of the end of peace. Basically, that's what he would argue. I want to try to understand that kind of argument, which I've heard not only with this ambassador, but in fact many times. And I think there are two reasons. And if I try to put myself in the shoes of or in the mind of that ambassador, I think there are two reasons that this person could put forward, and that are reasonable reasons for saying exactly the opposite of the title of our panel. And I'm starting with this, but I'll be more positive, I promise, afterwards. But I think it's interesting to get the counter argument. And the first is that if we speak of the search of the forcibly disappeared, and I insist, we're speaking about the forcibly disappeared and not just the missing persons. or the disappeared for any reason. We are, in fact, speaking of searching for responsible persons who have been victims of crimes. That is, persons who have been abducted by state agents, paramilitary groups, sometimes non-state actors, who have been held in secret, who have been very often tortured, who have been sometimes kept for years, sometimes they have been killed, and their remains have been concealed. So this is a crime by itself, and as you know, this might also be constitutive, depending on the circumstances, also of a war crime, of a crimes against humanity, and of a crime of genocide. So the conclusion is that searching, when speaking about victims of enforced disappearances, means basically uncovering a crime. So when you get the remains, you in fact discover that a crime has been committed, and which immediately connects to the question of whether investigations should be initiated and whether the perpetrators should be prosecuted. Of course, I'm aware that there has been many conceptual and practical attempts to disconnect the humanitarian search and the quest for justice. The so-called sequencing theory, for instance, that conceptualized the idea that maybe in a situation of transition, we could start with a humanitarian search, collect the remains of the disappeared, restitute the remains to the families, bring truth and some kind of peace, at least for the families, and then we'll see what comes next. And if at some point a possibility to prosecute the perpetrators, to open a program of reparation, that's fine. But let's sequence that. And in fact, that's what it's exactly what I was proposing to that ambassador, at the level of the working group. I was saying, well, let's start with, looking for the disappeared, and then we'll see. We don't need necessarily to speak about justice immediately. The thing is that, and I think looking backward to many experiences, this may have occurred, but I'm not sure these experiences where this has occurred and where there has been indeed a disconnect between the justice and truth, or justice and search, or search and investigations have been such, or are such good examples, because of the injustice it brings, but also because the results are not so fantastic in the end, including for the truth and for the search. And so this leads to the second reason why I was thinking this ambassador might be, reasonable in what he was asserting. That is, in some instances, the search, and if it leads to claims for justice, might lead, in fact, to conflict and not peace, in a sense that because the search is the uncovering of crime, such a process will not take place in a depoliticized environment. It will take place in a precise society, in a particular society, where conflicts occurred, where people fought together, and where there has been disappearances, sometimes on different sides and in different communities, and where the issue which have triggered those conflicts are still very much alive, or they're just, burning at a low pace, but in fact, the issues are still there. And I think there is a very important point, which is to consider the difference between what is the motive of the families when they are searching for their loved ones, and how their voice and their actions are perceived in a society, and how they are received, and also how they might be instrumentalized in a particular society. What the families, and most of the families that I've met, are doing is that they are, in fact, searching in the name of love that they have for their loved ones. And this is very often the expression that is used. I'm searching for my loved one. And this is, pretty much a deep, and in general, a depoliticized and a very human and deeply human sense of loss, uncertainty that push people to go on the square with the photographs of their loved ones and to ask for the truth. But very often the families are often caught, and the issue of disappearance is often caught and instrumentalized on all sides. The government will silence their claims by accusing the families of being the families of the terrorists, the families of the guerrillas, and in fact on trying to restore the image of these people who have been maybe killed or disappeared for good reasons, in the opinion of the government and the supporters. And unfortunately, on the other side, communities and political groups who claim themselves collectively to be victims of enforced disappearances and different crimes will accuse the families of being traitors or collaborators if the families are trying to discuss with the government and try to get a compromise with the government. And so the families get caught in the middle somehow. In many countries, we also see governments who try to divide victims of different communities or different political sides, and create some kind of competition between the victims. And it happens that victims who, in fact, have the same experience and have the same grief and have the same plain, genuine will of just finding the truth about their loved ones, don't talk to each other. Because they feel that if the victimhood of the other side is recognized, it would somehow prejudice their own victimhood. And this is something, of course, which is often very often fueled by the governments in power. The same issue also, and I won't take long on this, but the same issue with communicating with UN bodies, for instance, where this might be looked and by the government, or this might be finger point by the government as betraying the state or betraying the nation. Yeah. And some groups of victims who might be more sensitive to those patriotic arguments might, in fact, not appreciate and might accuse those who are willing to cooperate with the UN to be traitors also to their nations. So in the end, getting out of this meeting with the ambassador, I thought, well, he might be right, on some point. It's really hard, and it's really at least not obvious that there is a link between the search and peace building. At the same time, I could certainly not prevent myself to responding to that ambassador. How can you imagine that you will be establishing a lasting peace in your country without uncovering the truth about the forcibly disappeared? How can you imagine that this is going to be, you might have peace now, but how can you imagine that this is going to go on for a long period of time? Louis Joannet was saying that enforced disappearance is the crime of suspended time. There is a stop in time. In many countries, we see that no matter how much time has passed, years, decades, the question remains burning. Where are they? ¿Dónde están? Keeps on asking the same question. The mothers, the daughters, the grandchildren, sometimes generations after, will keep on asking the same question. So I get the question is, what do we mean by peace in the end? Peace is not ceasefire, and I think it's important to make the point currently. Peace is not even the end of war. When I think here in Geneva, we are speaking of peace, we are speaking, but I'm talking under the control of the great organizer of this event, we are speaking about a lasting peace, a sustainable peace, perpetual peace, to take up the Kantian idea. And the title of the conference, in fact, is telling, it's talking about peace building. That is not an event that occurs at a particular point in time, but a process, and a process which might take long, but in the end really brings peace to the peoples in the society, in the sense that it's in fact dealing with the causes of the conflict. And too often the governments with whom we are meeting think that peace is about silencing victims, imposing oblivion through amnesty laws, immunities, statute of limitation, and beyond that, legal measures, fear and reprisals. But this is not peace. This is not at least what I would call peace. And you cannot have peace in a society until you have looked at the causes of the antagonism between different parts of the society. So another concept to describe what is needed and maybe what we need to construct is the idea of democratic peace. That is a peace that is built through a democratic process, meaning an inclusive process based on human rights, participation, non-discrimination, with full respect of pluralism, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly and association. I would like to come back to the families of the disappeared. And again, every time I hear from them, what I hear as the main impulse for them taking or participating in public event is love. Is really that they miss the love of their loved ones. And it's, there is this notion, which I think now is very well identified in psychology, which is the ambiguous loss that the families of the disappeared are suffering. The fact that the pain caused by the uncertainty and absence is permanent. It's like every day, it's like every minute, it's coming back all the time. And there's no way that you can close the wound, and it remains open until the day you know. And at the same time, ambiguous loss also keeps love alive. The love and affection for the person who has disappeared remains the same because the person and the image of the persons remain the same until you have seen that person again, or you have seen the remains of that person again. So my humble submission here is that the permanence of love and affection as the main motive for search and for justice could be, if conditions are fulfilled, the main drivers in the process of building a lasting peace. So what would be those conditions? And those would be my last point. They can be initiated by the families themselves. And I want to mention here the experience of Algeria. In the 2000s, the government was trying to oppose victims of the states and victims of the terrorist groups. And I clearly remember at that time Nacera Dutour as the lead of the families of victims of enforced disappearances committed by state agents, reaching out to associations of victims of the terrorists and say, talk to each other. We are in fact living exactly the same experience of suffering because of the absence. And they created this coalition of the associations of victims of the 1990s, which was really a game changer because at that time the government could not anymore play one against the other. But in many other situations, these conditions may be created by the state itself. And of course, this is what we generally call the transitional justice initiatives. How to create in this context a space which is protected and free, where all families of the disappeared can share their experience and put their claims forward without being instrumentalized in one way or another. And I think that's a key issue, which is not often very well solved or institutionalized or regulated in commissions of truth and other institutions, or even restorative justice. If you take 3 examples and you could delve deeper maybe in this issue, post-apartheid South Africa, Morocco, IER, Colombia currently, are these spaces for victims and making their voice heard, are they created in those kind of institutions? I think this would be an interesting research, and that's a proposal for an academic program of research, in fact, and that would be my first proposal as a conclusion. Look at the concrete experience and try to evaluate how much those particular institutions have created this particular space for victims to be heard, and for victims to be heard for what they are really experiencing, which is a deep human rights experience common to all mankind, and the effect it has on peace in the societies. My second proposal comes from my experience in participating to the negotiation of the convention side by side with the families. And since then, I've been deeply convinced of the multiple virtues of families of different countries meeting and exchanging their experiences beyond borders. And one of the virtues is precisely that it allows victims to extract themselves from their national experiences, which are saturated with controversies, and realize that they are in fact sharing the same experiences across the globe. So I really praise the Catalan Institute for the initiative of gathering women searchers. And beyond this, let's dream a little dream. I would call for something that could look like a kind of world parliament of victims of enforced disappearances, a global institution that would have regular meetings of families all across the world to discuss and build something out of their common experience. And finally, as this is the season, and we might have been a bit perplex about the result, I would like also, as a last proposal and as a recognition of the families of the disappeared as agents of peace, to propose them, or maybe propose some of the most prominent figures of the global movement for the against enforced disappearances for the Nobel Peace Prize. And this is a call for starting to coordinate and launch a campaign as a follow-up also to the World Congress on Enforced Disappearances. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier, for having setting the scene. And now I turn to 2 relatives of enforced disappearances in Syria. We're going to share their testimony, their stories. So firstly, Obeda Dabag, your brother Mazan and your nephew Patrick were arrested in 2013 by the Syrian Air Force intelligence. And as a result, you became one of the plaintiffs on a very famous trial in France against senior Syrian officials who were charged with crimes against humanity. Secondly, Asma Al-Faraj, you were also a relative of enforced disappearance people in Syria. And your personal search for truth has led you to become the UK team coordinator for the organization Families for Freedom. So we'd like to hear both of you on your stories, on the challenges faced in accessing information and institutional support, and the role of the families in transitional justice and peace-building efforts. So maybe if you want to start.
Allô. Oui, depuis 13 ans, effectivement, j'ai oublié. Donc, je remercie Marina Eud. Je remercie également Olivier Doufrouville et Hugo Senderl, Hugo, qui travaillent sur cette problématique depuis des années et des années. Ce n'est pas une chose très facile. Cher auditoire, donc je témoigne aujourd'hui, c'est un témoignage d'un proche disparu en Syrie, tout simplement à la recherche de la vérité et de la justice. Mon parcours, pour que la lumière soit faite et que justice soit rendue dans l'affaire de mon frère Mazen Dabag et de mon neveu Patrick Dabag, s'inscrit dans une lutte longue, difficile, je dirais même très difficile, ça a duré pratiquement 12 ans, mais essentielle. Celle de milliers de familles syriennes qui refusent que leurs proches disparaissent dans le silence et l'impunité. C'était une tragédie familiale devenue symbole. Mon frère, Mazen, conseiller pédagogique au lycée français Charles de Gaulle à Damas depuis plus de 25 ans, et son fils Patrick, étudiant en psychologie à l'université de Damas, ont été arrêtés en novembre 2013 par les services de renseignement de l'armée de l'air. Leur arrestation a été arbitraire, brutale et suivie d'une disparition forcée. Pendant des années, nous avons cherché à obtenir la moindre information. En Syrie d'abord, en France ensuite, dans plusieurs pays, en Russie, etc. Souvent au péril de la sécurité de nos proches qui sont restés en Syrie. En 2018, le régime a finalement déclaré leur décès en prétendant qu'ils étaient morts de crise cardiaque. Mais les témoignages et les enquêtes ont démontré qu'ils ont été torturés à mort dans la prison de Mézé, comme tant d'autres. Je tiens ici à parler du rôle décisif de la société civile. En fait, si aujourd'hui l'affaire Dabag est devenue le premier procès en France visant des hauts responsables du régime syrien pour crimes contre l'humanité, c'est avant tout grâce à la mobilisation de la société civile. La Fédération internationale des droits de l'homme, FIDH, la Ligue des droits de l'homme, LDH, le Centre syrien pour les médias et la liberté d'expression, SCM, et d'autres organisations courageuses qui ont refusé l'oubli. Ces acteurs non gouvernementaux ont collecté les preuves, soutenu les familles, saisi la justice française et permis que la vérité émerge malgré les obstacles diplomatiques et politiques. Car il faut le dire avec clarté, les gouvernements, y compris démocratiques, ont un rôle très limité dans la recherche des disparus en Syrie. Les démarches diplomatiques entreprises pendant des années que j'ai entreprises auprès de la présidence de la République française, auprès du ministère des Affaires étrangères, de l'Union européenne et de l'ONU sont restées sans résultat concret. La raison est simple. La logique des États est celle de la réelle politique, des équilibres géopolitiques, pas celle de la justice et de la vérité. C'est donc la société civile, les ONG, les journalistes, les chercheurs et surtout les familles elles-mêmes qui portent ce combat. Sans eux, rien n'aurait été entrepris. Une justice lente. En fait, ça, le procès, les travaux pour obtenir le procès, ça a duré pratiquement 8 ans. Une justice lente mais porteuse d'espoir. En mars 2023, la justice française a décidé de renvoyer 3 hauts responsables du régime syrien devant les assises pour complicité de crimes contre l'humanité et de délits de guerre. C'est un pas historique. Pour la première fois, des responsables de très haut rang sont jugés, même par défaut, pour les crimes commis contre les citoyens franco-syriens. Ce procès n'effacera pas la souffrance, mais il brise le mur du silence et de l'impunité. Et après, aujourd'hui, alors que l'ancien régime Assad s'efface peu à peu, la question des disparitions forcées reste largement ignorée par les nouveaux dirigeants. Aucune politique claire n'a été mise en place pour reconnaître les victimes, enquêter sur les disparitions ou restituer les corps. Je parle en mon nom personnel parce que j'ai l'expérience et j'ai essayé de retrouver les corps de mon frère et pour les inhumer dignement. Jusqu'à maintenant, je n'ai pas pu obtenir grand-chose. En espérant, parce que je compte aller en Syrie pour voir directement rentrer en contact avec des personnes influentes qui pourraient m'aider dans ce sens. Mais toutes mes démarches ont été jusqu'à maintenant n'ont pas été fructueuses. La société syrienne, profondément meurtrie, a besoin d'un processus de vérité et de réconciliation. Mais celui-ci ne pourra exister que si la question des disparus est placée au centre du débat. En fait, la Syrie doit signer le protocole de la disparition forcée. Elle a signé pas mal de protocoles sur les droits de l'homme, etc., mais sur la disparition forcée, pas encore. Continuer à témoigner pour tous. Mon combat pour Mazen et Patrick n'est pas seulement un combat personnel. Il est venu une part d'un mouvement plus large, celui des familles syriennes qui cherchent la vérité, la reconnaissance et la justice. Je suis convaincu qu'au XXIe siècle, il ne peut y avoir de paix durable sans justice, ni de réconciliation sans vérité. Et c'est à la société civile internationale, à ses juristes, à ses militants, à ses citoyens de maintenir la pression, de documenter les crimes, de parler au nom de ceux qui ont été réduits au silence. Car tant que nous continuerons à témoigner, nos disparus ne seront pas effacés.
بدي أشكر حضور الجميع القائمين على هالجلسة لحتى نقدر نحن نوصل صوتنا وقصتنا الشخصية وقصص آلاف عائلات المفقودين. أنا أسماء فراج من سوريا، عضو قيادي برابطة عائلات من أجل الحرية. الرابطة بتقودها نساء وعائلات مفقودين من كل أنحاء سوريا. من لحظة تأسيسها بعام 2017 نحن عم نعمل على كل الأصعدة المحلية والدولية، وكنا موجودين بأغلب المحافل الدولية حتى نقدر نوصل صوت أحبتنا المختفين من سنين طويلة. وللأسف رغم كل هالجهود ما زال يعني مصير آلاف المفقودين والمختفين مجهول. بالرابطة اللي أنا بعمل فيها في عنا أكثر من 400 عائلة عندهم مختفين، ولهي اللحظة ما بنعرف مصير أحبتنا. وبعد سقوط النظام بنهاية 2024 انفتحت السجون والفروع الأمنية وما قدرنا نوصل لأي نتيجة أو خبر عن أحبتنا. قبل سقوط النظام ضلينا سنين طويلة نبحث ونسأل عن كل المفقودين وعن كل أطراف الصراع، النظام السوري، داعش والمجموعات المسلحة، وللأسف نحن ما قدرنا نوصل لهي اللحظة عن أي نتيجة إيجابية. قبل سقوط النظام كان عنا أمل إنه نلتقي بأحبتنا، كنا ندور عليهم أحياء، ولكن إنه بعد سقوط النظام نحن صرنا ندور عليهم بين قوائم الموت. القصة يعني بالنسبة إلي ماله يعني شغل حقوقي وإنساني أكثر ما يكون إنه أنا عن تجربة شخصية. أنا من عائلة مكونة من 9 أشخاص، 4 منا يعني عشنا تجربة الاعتقال والاختفاء القسري. أنا تعرضت للاعتقال لمدة 1 و3 شهور عند النظام السوري بسبب نشاطي السلمي، وأخي وأختي تعرضنا كمان لشهور للاختفاء، ولكن إنه وقدرنا ننجو من هذا الاعتقال، ولكن إنه أخوي الرابع ما قدر ينجو. انفتحت السجون وما طلع أخي. عشت هاي التجربة الشخصية بكل تفاصيلها. أنا آسفة من التوتر يمكن لأنه أنا عايشة هاي التجربة فكتير صعب أحكي عن هيك بدون توتر. يعني هذيك الفترة كانت أصعب شيء بحياتي، مو بس من التعذيب، وجود هاي العكازة جزء من التعذيب. بسبب التعذيب اللي تعرضت له عند النظام السوري. وتحولت لمحكمة إرهابية بسبب إنه أنا وقت اعتقلت انمسك معي أجهزة تواصل عن طريق النت الفضائي ومواد غذائية وطبية وقت كان الحصار بدرعا. كانوا محاصرين مدينة درعا لأنه أنا من درعا، وكنت عم بحاول دخل أدوية وأجهزة طبية للمناطق المحاصرة. أخي اعتقل ب 2014 بشهر 11، ولهلأ نحن ما بنعرف شو هو مصيره. أمي ماتت وكان حلمها تعرف وين أخي موجود، أو خبر يعني إنه هل هو عايش أو ميت. بتذكر كان ب 2020 كان حديث في بيني وبين أمي بعيد الأم إنه أنا شو جيب لك هدية، طلبت مني إنه أنا جيب لها خبر عن أخوي. ب 2021 بعيد الأم أمي ماتت بدون ما تعرف عن أخوي شيء. وحالة أمي ما هي حالة فردية، هي هي حالة مثل آلاف الأمهات السوريات اللي عاشوا سنين طويلة بين الأمل والانتظار، تعلقوا بأي خبر، بأي إشاعة، بأي صورة، وقلوبهم معلقة بسؤال واحد: وين أولادنا؟ وهي صورة مصغرة عن مأساة بلد كامل. بسوريا اليوم في أكثر من 150 ألف معتقل مختفي هلأ أو مفقود، يعني هن يعني أغلب العائلات بتعتبرهم بعداد الموتى، وما في آلية واضحة تكشف مصيرهم أو تحاسب المسؤولين عن هي الجريمة. بعد سقوط النظام انفتحت السجون والفروع الأمنية، وللأسف كان يعني كتير عنا حلم إنه أو خوف على هي الملفات اللي بعد ما انفتحت السجون والأوراق اللي كانت داخل الفروع الأمنية إنه يتم حراستها وتأمينها بأماكن خاصة لحتى يتم البحث عن أحبتنا أو مكان تواجدهم، أو المقابر الجماعية. للأسف تعامل ببداية السقوط تعاملوا مع هذا الملف، انفتحت السجون لكل عامة الشعب، تبعثرت الأوراق، وفي منها جهات سرقت هاي الأوراق اللي يعني صار نحن خوفنا عليها، الخوف اللي كنا نخافه على حبتنا انه هن يكونوا احياء، صرنا نخاف على هي الاوراق والملفات لحتى يعني يحافظوا عليها. وللاسف ما كان في شيء ايجابي بالتعامل مع هي الاوراق والملفات، والعائلات انتركت لحالها، بتدور لحالها، تسأل، تسمع إشاعات، تشوف صور، وتعيش بدوامة ما إلها نهاية. وعملية البحث عن المفقودين كانت بحد ذاتها رحلة مؤلمة، لأنك بتدوري على أخوك أو أمك أو أختك لحالك. وأحيانا نحن كنساء باحثات عن أحبتنا تعرضنا للعنف والتهديد والوصمة المجتمعية، ويمكن نضطر ندفع مبالغ مالية ومتأكدين أنه احتمال يكون هذا نصب واحتيال علينا، بس يكون في عنا بصيص أمل أنه ندفع مصاري مقابل أنه نوصل لجواب أو حقيقة. طول هالسنين كانت تجربة مرهقة ومتعبة، بس ضل جواتنا أمل واحد أنه لازم نوصل للحقيقة. للأسف لهلأ الحقيقة مجهولة. قضية الاختفاء والاعتقال لازم تكون قلب أي عملية سلام أو مصالحة، وهي جزء أساسي من العدالة الانتقالية يلي بتقوم عليه 4 مبادئ: الحق بالحقيقة، نعرف شو صار، مين الجهة اللي اعتقلتهم، كيف، مين هي الأشخاص اللي عذبتهم وقتلتهم لحتى نقدر نحاسب هدول الجنات، لنوصل لجبر الضرر ونعوض الضحايا ماديا ومعنويا ونفسيا، وحفظ الذكرى وضمان عدم التكرار. نضمن يعني كيف نحن بنضمن عدم التكرار والمصير لساته مجهول والمجرمين لساتهم موجودين بيننا، لحتى كمان نصلح مؤسسات الدولة حتى ما تنعاد هالجرائم. والعدالة الانتقالية بالنسبة لعائلات الضحايا هي ما لا رفاهية، هي ضرورة لحتى نقدر نحن نتعافى، والتعافي والسلام ما بيصير بدون معرفة الحقيقة. ولحتى نقدر نرجع نبني ثقة ونرجع كرامتنا كمجتمع، والسلام رح يظل هش والمستقبل مهدد يعيد نفس المآسي. وبخصوص الحكومة السورية، يعني في عنا أمل إنه تشكلت هيئة وطنية للمفقودين، ونحن كعائلات بنتأمل إنه يكون في تعاون بينهم وبين عائلات الضحايا، ونشتغل بصدق وشفافية لكشف مصير أحبتنا، أو يعني لنقدر إنه نوصل للمقابر الجماعية، نوصل لرفات أحبتنا، يكون عندهم قبر، يكون عندهم أسماء على القبور، بدون إنه نحن نضلنا عايشين سنين ورا مجهول. وهي يعني كثير حتأثر على هذا المجتمع إذا ما كان في حقيقة وعدالة. ولو نوصل محاسبة المسؤولين عن تعذيب المعتقلين داخل السجون. ومنأكد يعني ونتأمل إنه عن أهمية التعاون بين الهيئة الوطنية للمفقودين في سوريا والمؤسسة المستقلة المعنية بالمفقودين في سوريا التابعة للأمم المتحدة، لأن الحقيقة والمساءلة ما لازم يضلوا شعارات، لازم يتحولوا لخطوات حقيقية بتخفف عن معاناة آلاف العائلات. الحرية الحقيقية والعدالة ما بتكمل إلا وقت نعرف مصير أحبتنا، وقت الأمهات يوقفوا انتظار. وحفظ الذكرى نوع من أنواع العدالة، وأنه النسيان امتداد للجريمة. لهيك نحن عم نوثق القصص والأسماء حتى الغياب ما يصير محو. رسالتي أو رسالة كل العائلات السوريين أنه ما في سلام حقيقي بسوريا بدون ما نعرف مصير المفقودين، وبدون ما نرجع الكرامة والاسم لكل معتقل مختفي، وإشراك العائلات بعملية البحث، ومنحهم حق المراقبة والمشاورة في مسار العدالة والحقيقة. وفي نقطة كتير مهمة، يعني نحن من ضمن بين آلاف هدول المعتقلين في آلاف الأطفال مع عائلاتهم اختفوا اختفاء كامل. وفي يعني قصص، يعني أنا إذا بدي ضلني أحكي لكم، يعني أنا عشت تجربة الاعتقال 1 و3 شهور. بهاي 1 و3 شهور كان في معي معتقلات معهم أطفال، وبعدين أخذوهم على أماكن مجهولة، وأنا طلعت وهن ما طلعوا. فإنه قصة الاختفاء القسري جدا معقدة بسوريا، وأغلب الأسباب الاعتقال لأنه نحن قمنا بثورة بمطالب محقة، في ناس اتاخذت بسبب كلمة على فيسبوك. يعني أنا بتمنى إنه أقدر أوصل رسالة كل أهل المعتقلين، لأنه وجعنا كبير بسوريا. فرحنا بسقوط بشار الأسد، بس لهلا نحن هذا الفرح ناقص بدون معرفة الحقيقة ومعرفة مصير أحبتنا. شكرا.
Thank you, Asma. Thank you, Veda. Thank you so much for these very moving and useful testimonies. Now we're going to learn from Hugo from the IIMP. You are the chief of the search and identification section, and we'd like you to explain to us what is this institution, its mandate, its means, and your views on the opportunities and limitation in advancing the right to truth and supporting peace process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marina. Of course, it's very difficult to speak after your testimonies, and I would like to really thank you, Asma and Miss Asma and Mr. Obeida, for being shared with us your testimony. it is also a pleasure to be in this panel with very distinguished academics, and one of which I had the luck to have as chair of the working group on for disappearance at the time I was the secretary of that working group. I also want to thank, of course, the Geneva Peacebuilding platform and SEDI for the invitation. I'm here on behalf of Carla Quintana, the head of the independent institution, and ASG, who is currently actually traveling to Damascus, and this is why she was not able to be with us today. We heard the testimonies, and we know from a number of documentation that the tragedy of missing persons in Syria is immense. Marina mentioned 170,000. Asma mentioned 150,000. Of course, if we go beyond those forcibly disappeared persons, there are estimates that even mention up to 300,000 if we go beyond the merely the forcibly disappeared person. But this is not really a question of numbers. It's not numbers that count. What count is each case and the anguish and suffering of each family behind each case. But the magnitude can explain that this is an anguish and suffering that has an impact both at the individual level, but also the collective level, at the level of the society. And this is why the search, we need to see the search having these two possible impact, both at the individual and the collective level. The independent institution is a relatively recent entity. It was established 2 years ago with the GA resolution. And it's quite unique for 2 reasons. First, because it's the first time that the United Nations create a mechanism which is specifically devoted to the issue of missing persons in a specific context. And secondly, because it is really the creation of the families, families like the family of Asma or of Beida, who since almost immediately after 2011 started to advocate for a similar entity, and through their strength, through their resolve, through their advocacy and lobby, at the end they managed to see the independent institution being created in 2023. So it is important to see it really as an institution that has been created because of the family, and it is for the families. And of course, our intention is to implement it with the families. Let me, in a nutshell, talk a little bit about the mandate of the independent institution. The mandate is twofold: to clarify the fate and whereabouts of all missing persons and support the families. But it also has a very strong cross-cutting element of participation, which is also one of the elements that Asma mentioned, the importance of participation of families. I will touch upon it a little bit further in the presentation. What does all missing persons in Syria mean? It means not only those who went missing as a consequence of a human rights violation, as in case of forced disappearance or abduction, but also those who went missing, for instance, as a result of military operation, internal displacement, returns, or even those who went missing in the context of migration or asylum while seeking asylum. So those fleeing Syria because of the violence, because of the conflict. So it's really very, very broad. It is what is defined as a humanitarian, but it also has a very strong truth-seeking element. So the mandate is not only to determine the fate and whereabouts of missing persons, but also to clarify the circumstances under which the persons went missing. And this element of the right to know the truth of the families is, of course, a key element, as it was mentioned also by Olivier, to help Syrian society as a whole towards peace, justice, and reconciliation. And you will certainly recall what in the general comment, number 10 of the working group on the right to truth, the importance, that emphasized the importance of truth telling and truth thinking measures as a non-repetition element for enforced disappearance. The mandate also foresee additional responsibilities beyond what I mentioned. If the person is determined to be alive, the reunification with the family, or the release from secret detention. And if the person is determined to be dead, the return of the remains in a dignified manner. Of course, we need to take into account that December 8, 2024 has been a turning point. Has been a turning point, first of all, for Syrians and for Syria society and for their plight for truth and justice. But as Asma mentioned, it was also an incredibly difficult moment because many were united when the prisons were freed, but many more were not and are still missing. So also from the suffering and the anguish of the families, it was a further aggravation of that. But it has also been a turning point when it comes to the search. Because of course, now from that point on, the independent institution and other entities with a similar mandate could have access to the territory, which is of course an essential element of the search. And also at the national level, some sort of framework started to be developed to also look for the missing, which has been culminated in May with the creation of the National Commission for the Missing. And in that respect, let me perhaps stress two elements. The first one is that under international law, the primary responsibility to look for the missing rests with the concerned government. And that also applies to the right to know the truth for the families. And the second is that this must be a Syrian-led process, accompanied and supported by other actors, including international actors. Let me turn now briefly to our activities so far. For the search, information is essential. And therefore, one of the first things we have done is to create a system, an information management system, to be able to securely collect and process information, relevant information and data. And once we have done that, we are starting analyzing this data, and we open a number of lines of inquiry. These lines of inquiry are, of course, very broad categories, and each of them we are focusing on specific events, specific projects, specific incidents. The first one, and which is of course huge, is the forcibly disappear by the former government. Then we have one which is a little bit more specific on missing children, and specifically children that went through the so-called security placement or security deposits. Then we have one line of inquiry on disappearance carried out by other actors, including ISIS. And the fourth big category on, as I mentioned before, missing migrants or missing asylum seekers. Of course, this does not mean that we are not looking into other cases, which include the cases post-December 2024, which are also part of our mandate. Also a consequence of the changes that occurred after December 2024 and this was immediately after our head, Carla Quintana, took office in January, we start to develop our own forensic strategy and capacity in order to be able to support the activities of the authorities at national level, but also to facilitate the delivery of a large-scale multidisciplinary response, forensic response, to which all stakeholders can contribute. The other thing that we are working on is to work in coordination and complementarity with other actors that have somehow a mandate that are similar or some elements or relevance for us, including, and this cooperation and coordination include civil society organization. They have done a really fantastic work since 2011, documentation work, and which includes, of course, also not only case of missing persons, but a number of matters related to the conduct and what happened and violation, etc. And it is clear that it's not necessary, it's not needed to reinvent the wheel. So we established a cooperation framework with a number of these civil society organizations, which include also sharing of information. We also are cooperating with other international entities which have a similar mandate to us, like, for instance, ICRC and ICMP, the International Commission on Missing Persons, with whom we have regular and fluid communication. And we were able to identify some initial proposal for coordination to support the National Commission for the Missing. We also have coordination and cooperation with other UN entities like the IIIM, the International Independent Impartial Mechanism, and the Commission of Inquiry on Syria. Their focus is about accountability, but at the same time, it's important to emphasize that cooperation with them is essential, because accounting for the missing may also be conceived as a justice issue in the broader sense of the concept, and also intersects with the right to know the truth, which is an integral part of our mandate. And of course, we are cooperating with the National Commission. In Syria, we offered our assistance and technical advice with a view to support and also ensure complementarity. The other thing that we are working on, focusing on, is what Ansma mentioned, participation. The importance of participation in search, because that can be also seen as a form of support, which is the other core element of our mandate. And in that respect, I would only like to mention one example, which is being the establishment of the advisory board of the independent institution, which had its first session 2 weeks ago, and is composed mostly by Syrian relatives and Syrian civil society organization. In the remaining time, if I still have remaining time, I would like to respond to your second point about the opportunities and challenges. I mentioned already that we have a huge mandate, which of course is a big challenge. But at the same time, looking for everyone without discrimination is fundamental as a peace building element in the search to foster cohesion and reconstruct the social fabric. I also mentioned that now we have access. It is true, we have regular access, but at the same time, we don't have a permanent presence in Syria, and we are not able yet to open an office in Damascus, which would be essential to implement our mandate. There is a lot of information, as I said, both in terms of quality and quantity, but this information has to be accessible and has to be shared among all relevant stakeholders, which is also limited to the point already made about coordination and cooperation. All relevant actors must see the search as a collective and coordinated effort. Nobody can do this alone, no matter the expertise, no matter the resources available. So the expertise, resources, and experience of everyone is needed if we want to have a chance of success. And also the last point is about the urgency of the task versus the realistic expectations. The passing of time is unacceptable. Every additional day is something that should not be accepted for the relatives. At the same time, a search process is a long process, which needs the design of strategies, system, infrastructure, and also, of course, needs resources and expertise. This is why we believe it's fundamental the importance of transparency, transparent communication, and also managing expectation. But at the same time, the fact that this is a long process also means we don't have to lose time, especially in bureaucratic or territorial discussion, because we cannot fail on families and have a big responsibility towards them. Thank you.
Thank you, Igor, for this very comprehensive presentation. So now we're supposed to have 10 minutes to have a discussions between the panelists. I don't know if you want maybe to react to each other's presentation, or should I ask question or leave the floor to the audience, because I'm sure that you have many questions. So do you want to react to each other, or it's... Let's go. If we want to give time for the audience, I think it's better. So
oui, donc je disais en fait tout ce qu'elle a raconté, nous l'avons vécu. La famille, etc. C'est exactement les mêmes choses. Bon, personnellement, moi, j'ai pas vécu les trucs, je l'ai vécu à travers l'expérience de la femme de mon frère, de sa fille, etc. Donc, et de ce que les gens racontaient partout. Mais tout ce qu'elle dit, les extorsions de fonds, les mauvaises nouvelles, le fait de ne pas avoir la bonne information à tout moment, vraiment, c'est typiquement tout ce qu'elle a dit, tous les points qu'elle a dit, on les a vécus. C'est-à-dire, c'est quelque chose qui est systématique. C'est-à-dire qu'en fait, c'est vraiment, on sent que c'est quelque chose qui est étudié et qui est, voilà, pour essayer en fait, d'humilier les gens, en fait. C'est vraiment, le but, c'est pas, les gens, on les prend comme ça sans qu'il y ait qu'une raison valable pour les prendre. Il suffit, comme elle a dit, d'avoir aidé. Et à l'époque, moi, je me rappelle, parce que ma femme, elle est de Dara, donc, elle disait qu'en fait, les médecins prenaient en fait, du matériel médical et ils payaient de leur vie ce genre de trucs. C'est-à-dire, on n'avait pas le droit de faire ça. Donc, c'est quelque chose de systématique. C'est un pays vraiment... le but était vraiment de détruire la population, de détruire... c'est-à-dire, là, effectivement, le pays, il est détruit, mais les gens sont détruits à l'intérieur. C'est-à-dire, tous ceux qui ont perdu des gens, moi, ça fait 12 ans que je pense, moi, ce qui m'a poussé, c'est-à-dire, à faire ce truc-là, c'est que à un moment donné, je me suis dit, c'est pas possible. C'est-à-dire, c'est mon frère. Si moi, j'ai été dans sa condition, j'aurais aimé que quelqu'un fasse quelque chose. Donc, moi, j'ai eu cette chance que mon frère est de nationalité française, donc on pouvait faire quelque chose en France, parce qu'en Syrie, on a essayé, parce qu'on avait pas mal de contacts, mais c'était impossible. C'est-à-dire, on avait accès à des gens très haut placés, c'est-à-dire, mais personne ne pouvait faire quoi que ce soit. C'est-à-dire, les gens ne peuvent pas s'imaginer comment les choses sont faites. Vraiment, c'est quelque chose d'inimaginable quand on fait. Donc, on a essayé par tous les moyens en Syrie, etc. Donc, je passe, en fait, j'ai contacté même Bogdanov, j'ai contacté vraiment l'ambassade d'Iran, en fait, tous les intervenants en Syrie pour arriver. Et finalement, je suis arrivé à la conclusion que vraiment, tous ces pays, tous ces gouvernements, la présidence de la République française, j'ai envoyé des courriers, j'ai reçu des courriers en disant que voilà, nous compatissons avec votre histoire, etc. Mais bon, nous allons mandater le ministre des Affaires étrangères pour faire quelque chose. Et en fait, finalement, rien du tout. Des députés, j'en ai vu des dizaines. J'ai contacté des dizaines et des députés qui sont allés en Syrie, etc. C'est pour dire que vraiment, c'est quelque chose que c'est un combat en fait où personne ne sait ce qu'on est en train de faire. C'est-à-dire même les gens les plus proches venaient nous dire mais c'est un combat qui ne mène à rien, ça ne veut rien. Mais il fallait l'obstination, il fallait les trucs et finalement on est arrivé à quelque chose. Mais c'est pour dire que les gens doivent s'investir. C'est-à-dire tous ceux qui ont un truc, donc c'est bien par via des associations, via des trucs. En fait, c'est comme ça des ONG, des trucs. En fait, parce que attendre des gouvernements qui fassent quelque chose, ça, je ne pense pas.
Merci.
Thank you. On this point, I mean, a related point, we actually have our public information in Syria. But especially at the beginning of our operation, we had a lot of information of people on the ground who would just indicate that they were from the institution and they were approaching families, asking for money, etc. So we had to do a sort of, public messaging that the independent institution, well, first of all, at the time we were not on the ground. But also that, of course, if we are on the ground, we are not requesting money. So it is something that we also encountered in our experience. I mean, now it's sometime that we are not hearing this anymore, but it was certainly an issue also for us.
Well, thank you. So now the audience, any questions? The students. Too shy? Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Anna Sarkisian. I'm from Armenia. Thank you very much to the panelists, both sharing their personal stories, devastating stories, I would say, and also to the participants who are dealing with the issue on a daily basis. I am not sure that this is a question, but kind of a comment on whatever I have heard right now. The case of Syria is something that is domestically dealt with, right? The issue of these people is something that is dealt with domestically. In case of Armenia, for those who didn't know, in 2020, just amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, Azerbaijan launched a full-scale war towards Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, after which, we not only had casualties, but also people who are forced, not only displaced, but also disappeared. The issue with all those disappeared people, and we have reportedly about 200 people who are currently detainees in Baku in Azerbaijan, though Azerbaijan doesn't claim any numbers and figures. Armenia released 14 people, whoever we had during the war, to the government of Azerbaijan, with hope that there will be this reconciliation kind of relationship and start of the peace agreement and peace negotiations. This didn't happen, and as if it was not enough, the issue was even deepened. You may have heard that ICRC ceased its operations in Azerbaijan this September. That was the only international organization that was mediating between Armenia and Azerbaijan on detainees and prisoners of war. So I would just like to hear the maybe the opinion or any experience, if there is, if we had any precedent when the international organizations that are dealing with this kind of issues cease their operations on the ground? So what is the next step for the governments of Armenia and Azerbaijan, between which there is not much of a willingness coming from Azerbaijan to cooperate on the issue? What is the practice in this regard to deal with the issue? Who will be dealing with the fates of those people, if there is any international organization in charge of that? Thank you very much.
I was saying I'm not sure I have a response to the particular case. I understand the ICRC was moved out, right? That's it. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's clearly a bad a bad news. But I would say so. Of course, the best way would be for the two governments to have discussions and to come to and to negotiate and to come to a result together. But it's true that if there's nothing or no mediator in between, I don't know. I understand that there are discussions currently which are mediated by a great power between the two parties. So I don't know. It might come out with some results. But as far, I think, on the point of view of the victims, I would say it's important to keep on sending information to the relevant institutions. And in particular, as far as the UN is concerned, Armenia is a party to the Convention on Enforced Disappearances. Unfortunately, Azerbaijan is not. But we'll be glad that Azerbaijan, we've repeated this, that they would become party to the convention. They seem to be interested because they are frequently coming to the meetings that we have with these parties, and they are making declarations, even though they are not a party to the convention. And then, but for communications which are sent to the state, which is allegedly detaining the persons who have been disappeared and is not a party to the convention. The beauty of the system is that we have another body, which is the special procedure, which is the Working Group on Enforced Disappearances. So I would submit this is very important to, and if it's not been done yet, to continue submitting cases to the Working Group on Enforced Disappearances. And then the second part would be to support the Working Group on Enforced Disappearances as well as the whole human system, because you may know that currently the UN system is not going very well. And in fact, it's going through a liquidity crisis. And so, so I encourage to submit cases while also saying that there's an immense backlog of cases currently.
Well, first of all, thank you very much to all of you. So my name is Anissa Belal. I'm the director of the Geneva Peacebuilding Platform and Geneva Peace Week. So thank you to all of you for coming here today and conveying your testimonies. And on this very important topic, I think it was very clear to us the link between the problem of enforced disappearances and peace building indeed. And so I thank you. Sorry we were a bit late to your panel, but I have a question that might be very, very obvious to you, but in the case of Syria, so we know from past conferences and workshops that there is currently not so much work being done on transitional justice processes, or at least to addressing the violations that have been committed, not only by the Assad regime, but by all the forces there. And one of the questions, so you mentioned the Commission has access, okay? So now there is access, and but since the link between enforced disappearance and the right as a victim to truth and to know where the body of your loved ones are, to have access to the files and everything, is very close also to the commission of international crimes, committed perhaps also to a certain extent by the regime which is now in place. How open are they to the claims made by the families to, in fact, because they might themselves run a risk of being accused of committing these crimes. It was the case in Algeria, where it was, enforced disappearances were not committed by the Islamist groups, but also by the regime itself. So conveniently, they issued this amnesty law, which covered all the crimes covered, done by all the parties. And here, what is going on in Syria? I mean, what are the, so you mentioned the possibility and the chance that you had in France being binationals. What is being done in Syria with the current authorities there in relation to the fact that they might be accused of having committed these crimes themselves, including torture, including all the other crimes that were committed in this horrible conflict.
Moi, je m'attendais à ce que, une fois que le régime Assad est tombé, que ce serait la priorité de la justice transitionnelle et des expériences, ça serait la priorité des priorités. Malheureusement, ça n'a pas été le cas. Quand le nouveau régime a pris le pouvoir, en fait, la première chose qu'il dit, allez, partez. Il a utilisé une phrase qu'avait utilisé le prophète à l'époque pendant les guerres de trucs. Il avait dit, vous pouvez partir, vous êtes les libres. Donc ça a permis vraiment à ce que beaucoup de dignitaires syriens puissent partir. Donc en fait maintenant, si je veux faire quelque chose, moi j'ai essayé de porter plainte maintenant en Syrie, parce que maintenant c'est possible, et j'ai trouvé que c'était difficile. Les gens que je devais poursuivre, c'était des gens très haut gradés, c'est-à-dire c'était pratiquement les bras droits de Bachar al-Assad, etc. Mais ils sont partis, ils sont tous. Donc c'était quelque chose de très important, en fait, que le régime prenne conscience qu'une des priorités, c'était la justice transitionnelle. Malheureusement, c'est venu trop tard, parce que la pression peut-être des gens, peut-être des gouvernements extérieurs, je ne sais pas, mais j'ai toujours senti que, en fait, ce n'était pas leur problème majeur. C'est-à-dire en fait que et le problème se poursuivra parce que le problème, c'est que si vous ne prenez pas conscience de ça, vous allez perpétrer les mêmes choses. Vous allez faire les mêmes choses. Il y a des gens peut-être maintenant qui sont en prison qu'on ne sait pas, qui disparaissent. Donc c'est pour ça, c'est-à-dire le protocole qui a été proposé il y a 1 an, je crois, j'avais assisté à une conférence ici à Genève, en fait, où beaucoup de pays ne signent pas le protocole des disparitions forcées parce que elles ne veulent pas. C'est-à-dire, c'est ça qui est terrible, c'est que les gouvernements, on a des difficultés à le faire. Et donc, moi, quand je vois la Syrie essayer de faire quelque chose, bon, pour le moment, avec cette commission qu'ils ont créée des disparitions forcées, j'espère que, moi, comme point de vue pratique, je parle, hein, je ne veux pas être contre le régime syrien, je pense qu'il a assez de problèmes à résoudre pour un truc, mais moi, par exemple, dans mon cas personnel, je dis, bon, ben voilà, la commission a été créée il y a 5 mois, au mois de mai, 27 mai, et j'essaie depuis ce jour-là de rentrer en contact avec cette commission. C'est impossible. Donc, c'est-à-dire qu'il y a un chaînon manquant, il y a quelque chose qui manque. C'est-à-dire, ils ont beau dire qu'ils allaient créer un site web en fait, où les gens pouvaient intervenir, disons, donner les datas sur leurs proches, etc., pour recherche. Je n'ai pas pu le faire. C'est-à-dire, donc, je ne sais pas, c'est-à-dire, est-ce que c'est des trucs, c'est des sortes de leurres, d'amadouer la population, dire voilà, finalement, on va faire des choses, etc., sur la justice transitionnelle, sur les trucs, on va condamner. Mais à mon avis, c'est trop tard. C'est-à-dire, tous les dignitaires qu'on aurait pu à ce moment-là prendre, etc., sont partis. Et maintenant, peut-être qu'on va condamner des sous-fifres, des gens de deuxième, troisième catégorie. Donc, ça ne sert à rien. Enfin, les grands sont déjà partis. C'est-à-dire. Et ça, c'était un premier truc. C'est pour que la société. Moi, si un régime, il vient, il me dit voilà, ma priorité, c'est que ce genre de trucs ne se reproduisent pas, même en le disant, en le parlant, pas forcément, c'est un truc difficile. C'est-à-dire la preuve, c'est que en Argentine, il y a eu les femmes qui ont disparu, des trucs qui 20 ans, 30 ans, 40 ans après sont encore à faire. Donc c'est une problématique qui est à long terme, c'est-à-dire qui n'aboutit même pas. C'est-à-dire, mais au moins, le régime aurait dû prendre des décisions dès le premier jour, et malheureusement pour la Syrie, ça n'a pas été fait. Et le cas de la Syrie, pourquoi il est différent des autres? C'est parce que le nombre de disparus forcés est très important. Dans beaucoup de pays, il y a des disparus forcés. Il y a une quarantaine, cinquantaine, des gens qui parlent contre le régime, donc qui disparaissent, etc. Mais la Syrie, ça a été une politique vraiment étatique. Et donc, c'est le nombre de disparus forcés qui est important, en fait. Et bon, malheureusement, c'est-à-dire, moi j'ai bon espoir parce qu'il faut toujours espérer qu'on y arrive, parce que sinon, on ne serait pas là. Mais je dis, c'est un combat très, 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 très difficile et très long. Et en Syrie, je pense que ce sera encore beaucoup plus difficile. Voilà. Mais j'espère. C'est-à-dire, il y a l'espoir qui fait vivre.
Okay, so you want to last word?
To complement this issue, I think it's maybe a little bit early to say, especially when it comes to the recent events. But what is encouraging is that there is a framework, for instance, at the international level. I mentioned that our mandate is focused on clarifying the fate and whereabouts of the missing, but there are other entities that are specifically mandated to look at issues related to Syria, but more on the accountability side. One is the Commission of Inquiry on Syria, which actually already was in discussion with the authorities about the recent events, but also there is the triple IM, which I mentioned before, which instead has a more, if you want, a mandate that is in between international human rights law and international criminal law. And they also preserve documentation and evidence for possible cases, like, for instance, the one of Mr. Dabak. So it is really like quite unique also to have so many mechanisms focusing on a specific situation, which does not necessarily mean that is to get result, but to have a coordination among them to produce result, I think it's a positive step. At national level, again, it's too early to say, but besides the National Commission on Missing, the authorities also created the Transitional Justice Commission.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going over there. I have exactly 1 minute to try to summarize. Okay, so I have many papers. I will, it's a big challenge. So thank you so much. Key points and key recommendations. Firstly, a country cannot rebuild until families get truth, justice, reparation, and guarantees of non-repetition. The families and survivors must be included in the peace process, but not be instrumentalized. Evidence and independent documentation related to the enforced disappearances must be protected and must be accessible to all. Networks to share information and good practices must be created, and maybe an international parliament of victims and relatives. A culture of lasting peace should be guaranteed, and it means not only the end of violence, but also respect for dialogue, pluralism, non-discrimination, and human rights in general. And lastly, the memory of the loved ones and of the events should be preserved. I did it. So don't forget that we have a rendezvous in December 2026 for the anniversary of the convention. And it was really a pleasure to participate to this panel, and I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the organizer and to the great, great panelists. Thank you for so much.